So welcome. My name is Justin Calvin. I'm one of our Emsi Burning Glass account managers here. I've been doing so for just over 2 years now. I'm super excited you guys were able to join. Today, we're going to be talking about our recruiting analysis report within our recruiting module. We're going to be talking about how do you optimize a search using occupations, using skills, using job titles. How do you triangulate those in order to build out a search that's really specific to what you need. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. You feel free to ask questions even now within our chat feature. We're going to address those questions here at the end, so long as there's time. And if there's any question that you feel you just prefer meet one-on-one with an Emsi Burning Glass rep, feel free to reach out to your account manager. You might also, after this is said and done, want to see this same workflow with a particular role of yours, feel free to reach out to your account managers and they'd happily walk you through that. And then the third and last housekeeping item is feel free to download a PDF of this training even right now. We are recording this and we'll send out a recording here in the next day or so once it's processed. So if you have to drop early, no worries, we'll get you that recording. So excited you're here. Happy to dive in. I'm going to be jumping between slides and the Emsi tool. Probably the first 25, 30 minutes will be content, and then we'll leave the rest for questions. So wanted to just start off chatting through a little bit about what is Emsi Burning Glass data, what is the data that's piped into your recruiting module, pivot over to how do you find the appropriate government occupation for your particular roles, and then if that government occupation is too broad, it's not giving you ultimately what you need, how do we layer on top of that skills and keywords in such a way that we can make sure to hone in on the people that you need. So just a little bit of context for what is the data that feeds this platform before we dive in. So at Emsi Burning Glass, we're compiling lots of different data from several different data sources. Ultimately, what we're doing is once we have that data from those different sources, we're unsuppressing it, deduplicating it, aggregating it in such a way that's concise, detailed, but in such a way that it's very user-friendly and interactive in a way that's very digestible within those reports themselves. This is extra important today. It's always been important, but in this post-COVID era, where the market is ever-changing and fast-moving, there's an extra need for near real-time data to assist your talent acquisition, HR, site selection strategies. And so what we do is we're grabbing the most real-time data that we can, compiling it, and ultimately providing it in such a way that you can make these decisions based on it. So the primary tool and the primary report we're going to be spending time in today is our recruiting analysis tool. This is housed within our recruiting module. If you have our recruiting module, this will be very familiar to you. If you have either our premium or our staffing module, think of this as the occupation snapshot report, that report in the top left. They're not identical, but they are treated very similarly. And everything that we do today can be replicated for the most part within that occupation snapshot report. The value add and the reason why we're doing this report primarily is because this report does a great job of compiling all of Emsi Burning Glass data all in one place. You can see there at the bottom of that page, we're grabbing occupational data or SOC code or government data, profile data, as well as job postings data, just to give you a real nice catch-all of what's going on in a particular role in a particular market. I want to talk about those three data sets just briefly, just again to give you some context for what we're going to see here in a moment. So the first and the foundational piece of the recruiting analysis is occupation data, government data, SOC code data. I'll use those terms interchangeably. The reason why it's the foundation or the backbone is just because of how comprehensive it is. That's coming from government sources like the QCW, like the BLS. That means we have data on 99.9% of the workforce into things like diversity and demographics, supply of talent, compensation, where folks work, et cetera, et cetera. So lots and lots of data points, very comprehensive, very robust. Now, the only reason why we don't call it quits with that occupational data alone is there is a limitation in every single job you enter in has to fit within one of 756 occupational categories. So for example, if you're looking for an ICU nurse, the government will only get you as far as that registered nurse bucket amidst all of the other registered nurses available. So in order to really fine tune your search criteria by skill, by keyword, by nuanced job title, we have to go beyond those 700 or 800 occupational categories. And to do so, we're grabbing two other data sets, profiles data and job postings data. So our profiles data first is coming from millions of online profiles and resumes. What we're doing is we're grabbing a few dozen professional profile sources plus a third-party resume data set, totaling about 120 million US workers, roughly out of about 160 million workers that actually are in the US. So you can do the math there, roughly 70–75% saturation. So not comprehensive of the labor force, but a very good sample size. The value out of this is that we have that self-reported information of how people talk about themselves and identify themselves. That is, what do people consider their job title? What skills, credentials, qualifications do people claim to have? What employer do they have? What's their job history look like? Things of that nature. So all of these things are on that supply side. So you, as you're trying to find an ICU nurse, or if you see that picture, a registered dietitian, we can start to see, hey, where people work, create that list that we're going to poach from, identify the skill sets that we need, all of those items. And then the biggest piece of this for today's training is we're able to actually get down to skills and keywords within our search so that we can start to look for an ICU nurse or a registered dietitian beyond just those government occupations. And then the third and last data set that we loop in here is our job postings data. And so this, again, very similar, but on the demand side to profiles. This is, we're grabbing millions of job postings, scraping those every single day, and actually every day piping them back into the tool. So this is our most real-time data set, literally seeing data up to yesterday. And so what you can see is, hey, for the roles you're interested in, who else is competing? Who else is looking for those individuals? How are they doing so? How many employers are there for your roles in your markets? And you can get a really good indication of the competition, of the demand, using our job postings data. And again, we can start to see that demand at the job posting skill keyword level. Okay, so the recruiting analysis, this is the primary report we're going to be in today. It does have that government data, job postings, and profiles data. Now, when we're starting this search, there's a few different ways that we can go about it. So there's, you'll see the simple options and you'll see advanced options. Ultimately today, I'm going to give you what you need to know. Hey, can I get away with the simple options? Will that suffice? Will that give me the data I need? Or will I need to jump over into those advanced options in order to make sure I'm speaking apples to apples with the roles that I'm interested in? So what we're going to do is we're going to start off, I'm going to jump into the tool. You should see the Emsi recruiting module here. Again, if you have access to our recruiting module, this is going to look very familiar. If you have access to either our staffing or our talent acquisition premium software, this is going to look quite different. But the recruiting analysis, just think of this as the occupation snapshot. There's going to be a lot of crossover between those two reports. So I'm going to dive right in here, and I'm going to start off just showing you when a simple option search criteria like we're in now, when this will be sufficient. I'm going to give you an example of that. So let's say I'm looking for a registered nurse. Oops, if I finish it, registered nurse. And I'm looking specifically in New York City. I'm going to run this report, and there's two litmus tests that I want you to filter through as you're starting a search to see, hey, is the simple options going to be enough? So that first litmus test is, hey, we typed in registered nurse, that was our job title. That's one of our Emsi Burning Glass job titles within our 75,000 title library. And so we've mapped it to one of those EBG titles. And what we see is which of those, which government occupation does that EBG title get mapped to? In this instance, it is registered nurse. So you can feel pretty confident looking at that mapping that, hey, this is a pretty well-defined, fairly specific, fairly niche occupation that I'm pretty confident, hey, if I'm looking for a registered nurse, this seems sufficient. The other litmus test that I would encourage you to look at are things like supply, things like compensation, and even start to look through some of those top companies, because you're going to have a pulse on who are the big players in your market that either have those people that you need or are looking for those people that you need. And those are going to be great litmus tests or gut checks on, hey, is our search fine-tuned enough? Now, let's say we've done that and this is great. Okay. Now, let's say we also need another role here. Let's say we need a digital product manager, also in New York City. So for this role, I want to take another look and see, okay, so this is the digital product manager. That's that EBG title. Now, what occupation does that get mapped to? So we see here it gets mapped to the occupation marketing managers, and it gets mapped also to a core skill of product management. So I chose this example because this product managers is the #1 question I get asked by my clients, because at face value, that marketing manager's occupation looks pretty off. It doesn't look like it's categorizing a representative of the people that we need here. So helpful distinction to make. This, what we're not saying is this is a one-for-one, apples to apples relationship. But what we are saying is if we're looking for a digital product manager, so far as the government's concerned, we're speaking that marketing manager occupation amidst several other relevant job titles. So inevitably, when we're looking at this occupation, there's going to be marketing roles, marketing titles amidst those product manager titles and possibly some others. Now, what we're doing and what Emsi does on the back end, Emsi Burning Glass does on the back end, is we're mapping every title to its corresponding government occupation. And if it feels necessary, we're tagging also a core skill, saying when we're pulling from our profiles, when we're pulling from our postings, hey, make sure they have product management as a skill so that we can feel confident that this is represented. Now, I chose this example because you might say, you know, I at least want to double check that doesn't look right. I want to double check that that's the correct occupation. But also, yes, product management is there, but I don't see this digital aspect represented here. So I want to do a gut check. And again, I would recommend looking at supply, looking at comp. Maybe those numbers look wrong. Maybe those companies look not quite right. And in that instance, we're going to jump into another report. So I'm going to go back to Recruit, and we're going to dive into profile analytics here. And if you are part of our staffing or premium platform, this report you have access to verbatim. This should look very similar. So all I'm going to do within this report is type in my digital product manager title, and that's actually it. So I know I'm looking in New York City, but I don't feel the need to type that right now, because ultimately what I'm trying to do is use our profiles data set to see what are the various things that digital product manager titles get mapped to. Because ultimately what we're trying to do is create such a search criteria full of occupations, skills, and keywords to fully represent digital product manager in a way that we feel very comfortable. So all I'm going to do is type in this title. We're going to run it. Again, I mentioned this is pulling almost exclusively from our profiles data set. So 120 million individuals across the US that we have aggregated data on. And we see that we have about 3,500 profiles that are exactly matching our digital product manager title. They have that title verbatim. Now, what I want to do is I'm actually going to skip over a good chunk of this data. I want to look at those top occupations here. So what I want to do is, if you remember, we got flagged to that or mapped to that marketing manager occupation. I want to do a gut check and see, hey, does that seem right, or might there be a better occupation I can choose from? So when we grab these profiles from our profiles and resume data set, we're tagging those to a corresponding occupation. And we see marketing manager, that one that we already got mapped to, actually has 85% of all digital product managers get mapped into this occupation. But not only that, 85 is not 100, but there's no clear second or third place. It looks like the remaining 15% is pretty wholly representative across several different occupations. So I look at this, and even though that's not 100%, I'm confident that, hey, there's no better option, assuming that this is, a relatively normal digital product manager without some nuanced skill sets. I look at this and I say, okay, marketing manager is in fact the correct occupation. Now it's just a matter of making sure that with skills and keywords, I can isolate within this occupation these folks. And so to do so, I'm going to continue to scroll down. I'm going to find our top hard skills, top common skills, and top qualifications. Again, this list is curated from aggregated profiles. So these are the skills and qualifications that digital product managers say they have on their online professional profile source or on their resume. So what I'm going to do is kind of sift through these and start to isolate somewhere between 1 and 3 skills that seem to correctly identify at least the bulk of my role. And this is where I'm always recommending my clients to work very closely with recruiters, work very closely with sourcers, work very closely with hiring managers, because ultimately those individuals are going to know, hey, the titles can be very ambiguous. So what are the skills and keywords that we really need to make sure, hey, it's a must-have in order to categorize a digital product manager? Now, let's say I've already consulted my hiring manager. Digital product management, hey, that's a no-brainer. We need that skill. And I might even look through and say, hey, actually, certified Scrum product owner, that's also going to be sufficient. So long as they have either of those, we would feel comfortable hiring them. Yes, I'm sure there are things on this list like new product development, data analysis that we would like to have. But what we're trying to do is just identify, hey, what's characteristic, what is the baseline skill set that is going to define this role, and grab those. And again, 1 to 3 is probably a sweet spot for the most part. I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a moment. So I've worked with my hiring manager. We like these 2 skills and qualifications. I'm going to jot those down: digital product management and certified Scrum product owner. I'm going to go back to our recruiting analysis report, but now I'm not going to type that into our job title. I'm going to jump over to our advanced options and start plugging away at what I just found. So we found that marketing managers has 85% of digital product owners getting lumped into it. There was not a clear second or third option. This was pretty well defined. I'm going to enter New York City now because this is my target market. We could enter in keywords, things like maybe if you were looking for a senior role or maybe a management type role, you might enter in senior or senior, just really to pull out those senior digital product managers. I'm not going to do that today, but I would advise you to do that probably in that instance. Is a good example. If you're looking for a manager, if you're looking for a senior level, that's going to be a great place to do that, a Boolean string of those similar leadership type or senior type roles or words. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab our digital product management skill that we found, as well as our certified Scrum product owner skill. Because I worked with my product owner, they said, I worked with our hiring manager, they said, hey, either of those will be sufficient. I'm actually going to jump to this any skills now, because my hiring manager said, hey, if they have this or if they have this, that's going to correctly identify what we need. Now, you might not always have that luxury. Sometimes you might say, hey, they really need both, and we're going to need to press this all skills button. And anytime you're doing an all skills, this is where I'd recommend choosing somewhere between 1 and 3, just because people are historically not great at reporting their skills in a comprehensive manner. And so the more skills you add that need to be together, the more you've got tunnel vision on, and you might be unnecessarily filtering people out that could in fact do your role. So try to do any when you can. If not, I would keep it somewhere between 1 and 3 if possible. Okay, so now we see new search criteria. We don't see our digital product managers up there, but that's okay because we're looking at the correct occupation, and now we're saying, hey, we have either of these 2 skills. That's great. That's going to be representative of what we need. Now, as you're going through this report, a lot of the data, specifically the job posting type data and the profile type data, are going to be impacted with these skills that we mentioned. Now, I want to flag for you a few pieces that come from the government data alone that aren't going to get us down to the skill level. And so you won't be able to treat that as data for specifically digital product managers. You're going to have to think of it a little bit more broadly speaking. It'll make sense when I get down there. So at first glance, I'll say supply, compensation, demand, all of those changed with our skills. If you remember, I think we were in the 150s range at the low end. Now we dropped to the 130s range. Our supply number definitely cut down because we started adding in some more specific things, some honing in on particular skills. I do want to flag, though, high unemployment of 13.8% in this job family. This did not change with our skills. This is the same metric, 13.8%, as the search we did previously. And the reason for that is you see this job family term, that's your indication. Anytime you see job family, think government occupational data. So what this is saying is, hey, the marketing manager occupation as a whole has unemployment of 13.8%. Any skill or keyword we add in here isn't going to change that number. So just make a note, that's going to be a little bit broader of a data point. And then the other piece that I want to flag is our diversity data. So when you are looking in our supply tab, looking in the diversity, you're going to notice these diversity numbers, both at the race, ethnicity, as well as gender level. Both of these are at that broader occupational level. This is characteristic of marketing managers as a whole and not going to change with the skills and keywords that we add. And again, that's just because government data only gets us to the occupation level. It doesn't get us any further, and diversity data comes from those government sources. But that's really it. You might find a few pieces possibly in the color commentary in these, these little check mark points, either the check mark or the X. You might find some other pieces like cost of living here. That's just going to be specific to New York City. That's obviously not going to change. But the bulk of this report is going to be changed with the addition of those skills and keywords, our supply, our top locations, our compensation, and even our demand is going to be specific to those skills. Okay, and the last thing that you might do is do that second gut check or those litmus tests to say, okay, now that we've got our criteria, how does supply look? How does salary look? How do those top companies look? How do those top companies look? And then we say, hey, that's more of what I was expecting. I think we're on the right track. That tells me that our skills that we've added and our occupation that we've added have correctly represented what we need. Okay, the last piece that I want to share with you here is we've now figured out how to correctly categorize our digital product managers using occupations and skills combinations. But now let's say, hey, I'm in New York City. Yes, I'd maybe prefer our digital product manager be in our New York City office. However, supply feels challenging, demand feels high. We're having trouble finding them in New York City alone. Let's actually open this up to a nationwide search. Let's try to relocate them into New York City, or even in today's age, could they be remote? If so, we can hire them anywhere. Hey, you don't have to come in, stay where you are, stay in Minneapolis, stay in Seattle, that's fine. You're just going to collaborate with our New York City office. So if that's the case, and we have that flexibility to look nationwide, what we probably want to do is jump into our last report here, our Geography Explorer report. We could enter in Digital Product Manager here, but for continuity's sake, let's match the search criteria that we've just done. We're going to add in that Digital Product Manager management skill, as well as that certified Scrum product owner qualification. I'm going to remove New York City because now we're looking nationwide. If I wanted that senior, this is where I would maybe add that senior or manager. You know, I might do a Boolean string like that. I don't care about senior in this role, so I'm just going to run as is. What this report does, it's a very simple, very streamlined report giving you supply, compensation, and demand, just in a very simple, just 5 metrics. And ultimately what we're doing is we're trying to find new locations that match our search. So first thing to note, we have 2 different looks at supply, and only one of these is going to be factoring in our skills and qualifications, and that's our matching profiles number. That means we're pulling from our professional profile sources and our resumes with this column alone because we're pulling in that profile supply number. But if we're looking at our job family employment, you'll see those numbers are much higher. We don't actually expect those numbers to ever agree because they're telling us different things. That's ultimately telling us how many people are in this marketing manager occupation. It's not factoring in on these skills. So if I, if I needed these skills and qualifications, I would say, okay, let's look at these profiles supply, let's look at compensation, let's look at demand. Now what I want to do is identify some locations that have high enough supply to be worth my time going, low enough compensation to be, I'm not paying through the nose when I go there, and low enough to demand to where these people aren't being hounded and recruited day in, day out, to where it's maybe more likely that they would say yes to my job offer. We have these nice highlighter buttons that you saw me clicking on that give us this nice color gradient, make it easier to see which numbers are really high, which numbers are really low. And what we can do is try to find, okay, high supply, low comp, low demand. I might find something like Austin, Texas here. There's almost 500 people, that's great. Comp, the median comp value, so 50% make more, 50% make less, but that median number's in the 120s instead of the 160s, 140s, 130s, and there are 241 job postings in the last 12 months, so 241 jobs that have been needed at this level. So Austin, it looks like a great option. I might even learn more about Austin in that recruiting analysis with this little button. Okay, so just by way of recap, so within the recruiting analysis or the occupation snapshot report, if you have our staffing or premium tools, we can start with, I always advise you to start with the simple options. Look at those taggings that we've already done, our Emsi Burning Glass team has already done. If it doesn't look quite right, jumping into the profile analytics report, double checking those occupation mappings, looking for some skills and keywords and qualifications that match your search and your role, working with the hiring manager to identify those, and then diving back into the recruiting analysis report, going into those advanced options at that occupation skill keyword level, and then we have a lot more confidence that we're honed in on the folks that we actually need.